This is Eyewitness News Conference.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Butel, and this is Eyewitness News Conference. Non-stop inaugural parties and the cabinet appointments stopped in its tracks on Capitol Hill have been the highlights of the first days of Bill Clinton's presidency. The parties are over and reality has begun to set in. The nomination of Zoe Baird to be Attorney General failed to get past the Senate Judiciary Committee, and she withdrew her name. How much damage has the Baird nomination done to the young Clinton administration, and where will the president turn now for a new Attorney General? Those questions and many others on this week's Eyewitness News Conference. We'll be talking with Congresswoman Nita Lowey of Westchester County, but first with historian and author Professor Henry Graff of Columbia University. With me to share in the questioning is Eyewitness News political correspondent Pat Dawson. Professor Graff, thank you for coming with us.
Nice to be here.
It is, of course, very much too early to begin to write a history or talk about the history of the Clinton presidency, but let's try to do it anyway. Looking over the past, we're taping this on Friday, the past 2 days of the Clinton administration, any impressions that you can share that you feel might be enduring impressions of the Clinton administration so far?
I was in Washington for the inauguration, and I saw the excitement and the enthusiasm and the crowds and the gridlock traffic, and I had a very keen sense that the public guesses that a new time has begun. And that, of course, is a characteristic of inaugurations. It's a new beginning, and it's something marvelously American that we do this without the pomp and circumstance of the British or of other monarchies, but we do it with playfulness and eagerness and optimism. And as I looked at Clinton himself and the entourage that he comes in with, I kept thinking of what President Kennedy once said, that to judge a president, you have to know what he has going for him. And what Clinton has going for him is energy and zest for the job. And of all the candidates, he was the one who had the fire in his belly, who wanted this job. And I think the public senses that. And I think they're going to give him a chance.
You make an interesting point, because one has to feel that there are a lot of people out there, Sam Nunn for one, Al Gore for another, who wish they had had the guts, the fire in the belly, to do what Clinton did, and they might have been leading that parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. Have you any feeling about that?
I think that Al Gore has grown greatly from watching Clinton. I think he's loosened up, if I could judge from him on the dance floor and the way he was handling himself as the crowd came through the White House on Thursday morning. He may not have the fire in the belly that Clinton had, but he's learned how to ignite it.
Do you believe that this inauguration, the inauguration of Bill Clinton, was in any important way different from other inaugurations with the same circumstances? Now, the Bush inauguration would not have the same circumstance because he was a continuation of the Reagan administration.
Yes.
The Reagan inauguration might have. Certainly the Kennedy inauguration had the elements present. But was there anything different, specific to the Clinton inauguration, that you would see?
Whenever there's a change of party, a significant change of party, which includes not merely the kind of 19th century shift from Democrat to Republican that often involve little ideological impulse or energy. When there is a change in party, as in 1913 when Wilson came in, there was a long drought for the Democrats. They hadn't been in since Grover Cleveland left the office in 1897. When Franklin Roosevelt came in 1933, you not only had the high expectations of action now in the face of the terrible Depression, but it was the first time since Wilson left office in 1921 that you had a Democrat, and so on. The Reaganites came in after the Carter period, and now we have had a long period of Republican governance, and there was the sense that we've got the rascals out. That's always the way, and we're going to do great things, and I think that there's a naivete in that, but it was good to have that naivete for one day.
Professor, the inaugural address is frequently a signal not just of practical intentions, but also of some philosophical signature, especially when, as you point out, it is a marked change from one administration to another, when there is a real sense that the country is shifting to a new way of doing things. What was the philosophical signature of the Clinton inaugural address?
It was a plea for cooperation, for a period of change. All presidents in the 20th century have come in assuming that they're going to make a change, they're going to make a difference. I think that there's something very special about this particular inaugural address. It was a kind of continuation of the campaign. It was weak on specifics, but there have been enough specifics during the campaign. And now Clinton was pulling together the ideas which he thinks will give purpose and substance to whatever it is that is concrete that he provides the Congress with.
It was certainly briefer.
Well, that was a reward for having sat through his speech at the Democratic Convention a few years ago. But it had a few good quotes. I think there's a very self-conscious effort to get into Bartlett's quotations. And that, I think, is new in the history of inauguration. Certainly it's been a characteristic of inaugural addresses since Kennedy's address in 1961.
I'm glad you brought up Kennedy because for a number of us who watched it, there was the clear mark of Kennedy's, the tone, if you will, the texture of Kennedy's inaugural address. Did you find that same texture?
Yes, but that too is part of the history of the presidency. Successful presidents are aped. Think of all the bearded presidents who followed Lincoln. And you know, even James Monroe, who was the last of the presidents to wear the three-cornered hat of the Revolution, had much of his popularity based on the fact that he looked like George Washington. So this goes back to the beginning. And why not copy a good model? And that was what Clinton was doing. He was reared to the idea that the model president was John F. Kennedy. How could it not have come out in the first words he utters as president?
Let's talk about the Attorney General, Zoe Baird, for a moment. She withdrew her nomination. It was almost inevitable over the first couple of days of the administration she was going to do so. That, how much harm, I should say, does this do to the Clinton administration? Will it be forgotten in a month, 6 months, or is it something that lingers?
My impression at the moment is that it is not going to hurt President Clinton. First of all, it comes very early. Secondly, it helps create the impression that he will make mistakes. On Wednesday, it appeared that he could do no wrong. And Franklin Roosevelt said very early in his administration, I won't get a hit every time I come to bat, but I hope to have a good batting average. This was a blunder. The presidency is an on-the-job training place. You can't prepare for this in any significant way. Clinton made a mistake. He left this to his transition team. As far as we know, they misjudged the seriousness of what it was that Ms. Baird had done, and he's learned from it. I hope it doesn't make him a very cautious man, but I think he's going to be forgiven because that somehow came before he was in the office.
Historically, has this happened very often, this kind of an early rejection?
Well, this is the first time that a cabinet appointee has been rejected since 1925, shortly after Calvin Coolidge was elected president in his own right, with, by the way, a much greater majority than Clinton had in 1992.
Well, there was John Tower in '89, we was rejected too.
That's right.
Yeah.
But
you meant Attorney General. Yeah.
Attorney General. In 1925, Coolidge sent in the name of Charles Warren, who was the attorney for the Sugar Trust, which was under indictment. And here he would be in the Justice Department sitting, as it were, in judgment on his own performance and on his own client. The Senate rejected it. Coolidge was furious, and it was a very close vote. And he resubmitted the name. And in those days, you could make an ad interim appointment because you hadn't yet gotten the 20th Amendment, which eliminated that lame duck Congress. And he was claiming that he was going to put Warren in as an interim appointment. Warren wisely decided not to take it. In 1868, Andrew Johnson send in the name of Henry Stanbury, very prominent lawyer from Ohio who had been Attorney General, who'd resigned as Attorney General to take on the task of defending Andrew Johnson in his impeachment trial, and then had done so well. Johnson was so elated and grateful that he sent his name in again once more to be Attorney General, and the Senate, furious that they hadn't been able to knock Johnson out of the presidency, rejected the name of Stanbury. So you have here 3 examples revolving around the Attorney General.
Let me ask you a candidly and patently unfair question. But as a presidential historian who has looked at all the 41 presidents preceding Mr. Clinton, would you be willing to bet whether he's going to be a good president on the basis of what you see and understand and know, and more importantly on the basis of how he compares with the other 41 people who precede?
I am absolutely certain that we historians should not do predicting, particularly about presidents. We historians leave predicting to the economists who are so good at it because they do so much of it.
Professor Henry Graff, thank you very much. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll be joined by Representative Nita Lowey of Westchester County. Right now, we'll take a break. We'll be right back. We're back now with Eyewitness News Conference, and we're joined by Representative Nita Lowey of Westchester County. Professor Henry Graff, historian from Columbia University, is still with us. We continue our discussion of the first days of the Clinton administration, beginning with a question now from my colleague Pat Dawson.
Ms. Lowey, you've just come back from Washington. Was the Zoe Baird nomination DOA on the Hill? What was the talk in the cloakrooms?
Well, I think everyone was deeply grateful that she withdrew her nomination. There was a feeling of great perplexity. There was a feeling of tension on the Hill. Those of us who wanted to see a woman as the first Attorney General were very excited. But however, the Attorney General has to be above reproach, has to have impeccable integrity. And I think now we'll go forward, put this behind us, and the President will select a new candidate who also will be outstanding.
Will it also be a woman? He made quite a thing out of the fact that, that the nominee for Attorney General would be a woman, the first time in our history that one of the top 4, as they're described, cabinet posts would be held by a woman. Will he, should he, name another woman?
I join the President in looking for diversity in his top nominees. However, we want to find the best person for this job. And there are many terrific women out there, and I hope that he will extend the search, look for an outstanding woman, but find the best person for the job.
You
be
say,
it woman or man.
You say the Attorney General has to be above reproach. It raises an interesting question. Do the other cabinet members not have to be above reproach? In other words, had this come up in Mr. Benson's hearing or any of the other hearings, Mr. Aspen's hearing, and one suspects, because one knows that this is a crime that is spread rather widely around the country, that is not paying Social Security on your domestic help. If it had come up in Les Aspen or Lloyd Benson, would the same standard be held? Well,
let me say the Attorney General has direct supervision over the INS and laws that impinge upon the INS, so that to have someone in that position who clearly stated that she violated the law, I think would be inappropriate. It was a violation of the law. And any candidate for any office should not be violating the laws of the United States. That's what frustrates Middle America, when they feel that their public officials can violate the laws and they have to obey the laws. So I think that it was probably more important in the hearings of the Attorney General, but I certainly think that violating any law is a relevant issue in the confirmation process of any official.
Professor, a president naming a woman is obviously playing to a certain constituency, and in addition to the element of fairness, in this case, I think to take it out of the area of playing to a constituency would be somewhat naive. Is it your impression that that's the kind of thing that Bill Clinton still has to do?
The president has to expand his constituency. Now,
This president.
He had only 43% of the vote. He knows that. I don't know that it is critical, and I agree with what Nita has just said, that he have a woman in the Attorney General's position now. He has to get the best person. We don't want that to become the woman's seat in the cabinet, as they used to talk of a Jewish seat on the Supreme Court. he has to find ways to reach out to the business community, a significant portion of which did not support him. He has to reach out to the Perot people who were sour on the whole political process. So this is a very critical appointment that he makes here. That expansion of the constituency is something that presidents who win by a whisker, and his was almost by a whisker, certainly in many parts of the country, have to do. Kennedy had to do this.
Well, how does he do it? And I guess the other question is, how long does he have to reach out, since he doesn't have that magic mandate?
It's hard to say. If he makes earnest efforts very quickly in dramatic ways, he's going to hold the attention of the people and continue this affectionate entry into his office, which we've witnessed this week. It's very important in the age of television to be dramatic. And I'm not sure that all these pieces are in place for a dramatic moment for the American people. But it's critical for him before the other side begins to recoup, to gather strength again, to find their sea legs as they look forward to the midterm elections. And they're really, I don't have to say this to anybody who's a member of Congress, they're always right around the corner, aren't they?
Congresswoman, what constituencies, from your perception, is Bill Clinton weak with?
Well, I would like to go back, before I answer that question. I think appointing a woman to this position is not just a rationale for expanding the constituency. There are many outstanding women out there who have been left out of the power structure for much too long. In fact, I'm on the Glass Ceiling Commission currently, and we're trying to investigate that serious issue and look and see why women have been left out of the circles of power. So again, there are many good women out there. I'm hoping Bill Clinton can find a good woman, because that person would be the best person to administer the Department of Justice. In terms of expanding the constituency, there were a good portion of the electorate that voted for Ross Perot, not because he was not a woman or because he was not a black, etc., but because they wanted the deficit reduced, because they wanted a serious approach to health care, they wanted a serious approach to the economy, to crime in the streets. That's the constituency I think the president has to appeal to, getting something done.
One question. You talked about the glass ceiling. Does the fact that Hillary Clinton will have an office in the West Wing as opposed to the traditional East Wing, does that chip away at the glass ceiling a little bit?
I think Hillary Clinton will be an enormous contribution to this administration. She has great knowledge, and she has been very active in a number of fields.
Will it accentuate the power of women
certainly.
in our government?
Certainly, and she'll be focusing on children's issues and health care and the other areas where she has acknowledged expertise.
Well, he clearly, the president has made the point throughout the campaign, although it was quieted down for political reasons through the latter part of the campaign, that Mrs. Clinton was a significant political element in his development and in the way he governed in Arkansas. But it raises an interesting question. We have seen this before with spouses, as they've always been, wives of presidents, playing a role behind the scenes, and generally they've been resented. Professor, why is that?
That's old-fashioned. We say resented. Eleanor Roosevelt is about to have a memorial to her. The first statue of a major political woman is going to be put here in New York. That was in ancient days.
But I doubt if anyone is going to enact or build a memorial to either Rosalind Carter or Mrs. Wilson, for example.
Mrs. Wilson was viewed as a usurper. She was the first unelected president of the United States, and she was often called the first woman president during her husband's tragic incapacity. Louise Taft worked so hard for Taft's nomination and election. There's a marvelous story that's told of Theodore Roosevelt in the dying days of his administration, sitting with the Tafts in the library in the White House, closing his eyes in the sing-song tones of a soothsayer saying, "I see a fat man," and of course Taft weighed 350 pounds, "and I see something over his head, and I don't know whether it's the Supreme Court or the presidency." And Louise Taft screamed, "Make it the presidency!" And she was the first woman to ride with her husband in an inaugural parade.
Yeah.
And alas, they were scarcely in the White House when she was incapacitated by a stroke.
The elements of resentment were clear, or were certainly there during this campaign. Why does it linger? You say it's old-fashioned. It may well be, but given the new role of women in this society, but it's still there on a certain level.
I have a very strong feeling that the resentment was more in editorials written by men. And all around the country there are working women who must have said, "Bravo." And I think that we're going to see great support for Hillary Clinton. And if she got herself into a cookie baking mode for the period of the election, we're going to see her as a co-president, and the public is going to be delighted. And
Will Al Gore be delighted?
I don't know whether Al Gore will soon be discovering what all vice presidents have discovered since John Adams. John Adams said it all in a letter to one of the first great political women of America, Abigail Adams, his wife. He wrote her very shortly after he became vice president. In being, he used the Latin word, in esse, I am nothing. In posse, in potential, I may be everything. That's all the vice president is, in being nothing.
Well, Henry, I agree with you with so many things, but I think that there is so much work to go around that this country should be grateful that they not only have Hillary Clinton, who is an expert in child care, other children's issues, health care, and the many issues that face working families of this country, but they should also be very grateful that they have Al Gore. And I do believe that the president is astute enough to use the expertise of Al Gore. He's an acknowledged expert on the environment, on armed services issues, on a whole array of military defense issues. And I do believe that the president has to make the final decision. But an intelligent chief executive officer will reach out to as many people as he can, get the best advice he can, and then he closes that door and makes the final decision. And I think that he will utilize Al Gore's talent, especially in the environmental area, and this will be a stronger presidency because of it.
Let me ask you a question which is not intended to be frivolous, and there are those who would say it is not frivolous, Willie, but everybody is talking about Hillary's hat. What did you think of it?
Well, I don't know that we should pass judgment on Hillary's hat. I was right up there in the platform with one of those disposable cameras. They do work. Yeah. And I took a marvelous picture of a glowing Hillary with her hat and her beautiful costume. And I think what's more important that she was glowing and she looked glorious, and she will be a wonderful contribution to this administration. I haven't worn hats in a long time.
But you will soon.
You think so?
Yes, I think you will.
I'd like to go to Mr. Bush for a moment, Mr. Bush and Mr. Clinton. Historically, is it unusual? Did Mr. Bush leave more on the foreign affairs plate that greeted Mr. Clinton than other presidents have done in the past, or is this not as unusual as it seems to lay people looking at what is going on in Washington and with Saddam and Somalia? You understand what I mean?
All presidents leave a lot on the plate for their successor. There's no question at all that it's happened in the past, but not as dramatically because it hasn't been bombing and it hasn't been internationally important. Grant, when he left office, had the awful defeat of Custer. He left that for his successor right before he left office. You say, well, it's a domestic matter, but we can find illustrations in American history. I've long been interested in the fact that Eisenhower tells us on his first day in office, he sat at that desk in the Oval Office and he found a locked drawer and he sent for a key, had it opened, and he tells that he took out of there a folder. We would call it a trouble folder. and it was briefing papers on issues he might have to deal with immediately. And they were left there by Truman. And that is how the presidency is always transferred from one set of hands to another. Theodore Roosevelt said he wouldn't deal with the tariff. He would leave that to his successor. I do not wish to leave my administration under a more or less dark cloud. They all try to leave on a high note for the historians and for those who will put out the future postage stamps and coins.
We just have a couple of minutes left, and I want to ask each of you to tell me, if you can, what one thing that Bill Clinton would do that would engender the kind of support we were talking about before, that would expand the constituency, that would make him a popular president, if you will. What would be the one thing he could move on quickly to make that kind of expansion of popularity?
Kind of quickly, because we only have 1 minute.
I think one of the most important challenges ahead is addressing the serious health care crisis in this country. And if Bill Clinton, and I'm not sure how quickly it can be done, can put together some kind of consensus to address the explosion in health care costs, to address the lack of accessibility to health care insurance, I think it will really make an important difference.
Professor, is health care the issue?
Health care is a major issue. We know that from all the polls. I also think jobs. If he could get a job program that would deal with inner city joblessness, he would get enormous backing.
Okay. Thank you very much, both of you. We're out of time on this week's edition of Eyewitness News Conference. Our thanks once again to Representative Nita Lowey and Professor Henry Graff for being with us. With my colleague Pat Dawson, I'm Bill Beutel. Thank you for watching and have a very good afternoon.